So, John, one of the more distinctive types of psalms, in part because they look so little like the rest of the book, is a series that we would sort of ascribe to the wisdom tradition, often identifiable by allusions to Torah or to sort of proverbial sorts of knowledge. Maybe we should talk first about what we mean by wisdom tradition. How do we recognize it, and what does it look like?
Now, I mean, the simple and somewhat facetious answer is that wisdom literature is literature that uses the word wisdom a lot. Mm-hmm. But there is a very recognizable type. And you get a lot of it in ancient Egypt, you get some of it in ancient Mesopotamia, and the basic ingredients of it are Proverbs, and then more developed the instruction. So if you think of the book of Proverbs, you have a collection of Proverbs from chapter 10 through 31, and in the first 9 chapters you have longer speeches, if you like, but instructions, and they're all about how to attain wisdom. A person who understands Proverbs is a wise person. Now, the other thing that should be said about this in the mainline Common Erase tradition is that there is an assumption that there is a connection between act and consequence, and that he who digs a pit will fall into it, this kind of thing, and that nothing happens without a cause, that things are connected. But a lot of it seems quite secular to us. This may not be quite the right way to describe it, but you do not have God interfering, generally speaking.
Right. It seems that what you get more is appeals to the natural order as evidence of God's work in the world.
That's right, but you know, it's the creator God working in the world. And the impression is, you know, that God creates the world, winds up the clock, as Leibniz would have had it, and lets it run. And that then it follows its own logic.
Yeah. Well, the very first psalm in the entire book is a very typical wisdom psalm. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers, but their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper.
Now, of course, the word that you're translating there as law is Torah. And the word Torah is also used in Proverbs for the instruction. You can have the father saying to the son, listen, my son, to my Torah. And so when they talk about the Torah of the law here, there's some ambiguity. I think it's quite probable that they mean the books of Moses, what we regard as the Torah, but you could take it more generally as the instruction of the Lord. And that could be something broader than the books of Moses. Now, famously, the first wisdom book that brings the Torah into it is the book of Ben Sira, which was written in the early part of the 2nd century BC. And Ben Sira has a poem in which it gets carried away on the wonders of wisdom and says at the end of it, by the way, this is all the book of the law of the Lord that God gave to Moses. And you say, what? Yeah. But it's kind of an external association, but it's both a way of looking at the Torah as well as a way of looking at wisdom. And I tend to think that in these wisdom psalms and also in Ben Sira, it is regarding the law of Moses as wisdom, as something you would meditate on.
Yeah, there seems to be a notion of there being a right way and a wrong way, independent of a collected law book. Right. There's and one way is what we call the way of God, and one way is what we call the way of the wicked. Yes. And I think then of Psalm 14, which begins, "Fools say in their hearts, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is no one who does good." That doesn't quite allude to the Torah.
True.
it sort of alludes to a more abstract notion of the right way and the wrong way.
That's right. But it definitely does imply that there is an instruction, a divine instruction, you can very well call it, the Torah of the Lord, that is the right way, and whether you have the books of Moses or not, you can get at that right way.
Yeah, this is similar to what we see in the book of Proverbs. As you said, actions having consequences. The notion that if you do right, you will be rewarded, and if you do wrong, you will be punished,
Yes.
which is more something to meditate on than something to hope for in real life, I suppose.
Yes.
But it's the kind of thing that you see in wisdom literature more broadly, including in the Psalms.
Yes. And there's one notorious example of it that you're probably coming towards there.
I am turning to it right now in Psalm 37, yes?
Yeah.
Where it says, if I will find it here, Psalm 37 says, I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken.
Are his children begging bread?
Now that's a fairly limited understanding of the world. Person seems not to have gotten out much.
Exactly.
But it does speak to a way of thinking about things.
That this is, you're tempted to say that this was written by an academic who didn't actually get out much, as you say.
Right.
Didn't see very many people. If you'd walked around New Haven, he might have found a few exceptions to this. Now, some people say this maybe isn't quite fair to the sage, that surely they did know there were exceptions to it. But even, you get this also in Proverbs, that some of it is kind of hardcore observation, call it as you see it. Mm-hmm. But then there is another layer in Proverbs that wants to assure you, no, everything actually does work right.
Right. You can see the more real life issues in Psalms like Psalm 73, which again will, as you see as I start to read it, has all of these classic wisdom tropes. Truly God is good to the upright, to those who are pure in heart. But then I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no pain. Their bodies are sound and sleek. They are not in trouble as others are, etc. This is somebody who is actually both dependent on the standard wisdom tradition of the righteous being rewarded and also cognizant of the reality and the problems of theodicy that wisdom traditions have to grapple with.
And theodicy becomes a huge problem for these psalms and for the wisdom tradition generally. So how, in fact, does he resolve it?
They say, the people who praise and find no fault, they say, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? And goes on about how the wicked are always at ease. And finally says, brings it on himself, I was stupid and ignorant, but I will trust you. You guide me with your counsel. I have no other choice, essentially, but to trust. For me, it is good to be near God. I have made the Lord God my refuge to tell of all your works.
So what he actually concludes is, but I'm going to believe this anyway.
Exactly.
I'm aware there's evidence that doesn't quite fit, but...
Right, and here I think you can see really what's going on in the wisdom tradition. That is, it is a meditative, intellectual way of, a self-conscious way of organizing the world.
Yes, and choosing to look at the world a certain way, even when you're aware that all the evidence doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
All of that kind of debate comes to a head in the book of Job, most famously. Mm-hmm. But, the psalmist is no Job. The Psalms aren't going to challenge the good order of God in the way the book of Job does.
So let me ask you this then. As we continue to ask questions about sort of the setting in which these would be written, spoken, what about the wisdom Psalms? Is there a cultic setting in which somebody would say this, or do we simply assume that all of the wisdom Psalms must be part of a later sort of stratum of the book of Psalms, such that they are already sort of more written than they are spoken?
Well, I think a lot of people would assume that they are indeed a later stratum, because It's kind of second order, if you like, that some of the Psalms of complaint really come from the gut. Even if they do it in metaphorical language. Look, I'm sinking in the water, there's a lion about to swallow me. But you feel that these are dealing with problems in life. In some of these Psalms, well, they're meditating on the Torah of the Lord, and that implies that it has all been laid out for them, and that what they're doing is not reflecting on their own experience on the street, but reflecting perhaps on writings or on instruction that they get. With some of those Psalms, you almost think they must have been written for Sunday school. But as far as we know, they didn't have Sunday school in the temple. But, they probably had some, and they certainly had some scribal. School may be an overstatement, but they trained some scribes in the temple.
Yeah.
And I imagine the wisdom literature in general and these Psalms are the kind of things that they would have used in training the scribes.
Yeah. Some of them really do read as very much written. I think of Psalm 119, which is the longest of all of the Psalms, 176 verses. I was thinking I might ask you to recite it to us, but we probably don't have time. But it is enormously long, far too long, much longer than any of the others, and is an acrostic. That is, it's sort of highly structured and ordered and very repetitive. It begins, of course, happy are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord. Again, that word, Torah.
Yes.
Again, walking in the Torah of the Lord doesn't make it sound like obeying the individual laws that we find in the Torah. It really reads more like path. And as I say, the thing really just goes on nearly forever. But again, I think it speaks very much to a more literary foundation for this, as scribal, as you say, rather than something that emerged from the gut.
From the gut or from lived experience.
Yeah.
Now, the way the word Torah is used in a psalm like that is what I would call an iconic use of the Torah. At no point will it give you an example of the kind of commandment in the Torah that you are to obey. It doesn't talk about justice, really. It doesn't even talk about issues of purity. I mean, any of the things that you get commandments on. It's just repeating over and over again, the Torah, the Torah. The Torah is wonderful. It's like a mantra. And so it's impressing on people. The Torah is something for which you must have great reverence. You don't actually need to read it. You don't actually need to get into the nitty-gritty of what it's saying. But I don't know if you do this also in the Jewish tradition. It's very typical in some Christian traditions to hold up the book.
Oh yeah,
for veneration.
Every
the
time
Torah shrines,
the book is held up. It's paraded around so everybody can see and touch it.
In a way, it's displacement from the content to the idea. This is the root of it.
Now, as we finish up with the wisdom psalms, given that somebody placed a wisdom psalm first, is there a sense in which the entire Psalter is sort of reoriented in that manner to be a wisdom book? That is the Book of Psalms wisdom literature as a whole?
As we have it, I think it's quite possible that whoever put Psalm 1 first intended it to be taken that way. But then we have a colleague in Hebrew Bible, Benjamin Summer, who wrote a paper one time on why Jews do not read books. And I think at least this would apply to Psalms. Nobody in their right mind reads the Psalter straight through, or the Book of Proverbs, for that of it. This is a book that strings together many different kinds of thing. It's a smorgasbord. It's something from which you can pick a psalm for an occasion that suits your mood of the moment. And so I think even if the editor of the Psalms intended that this all be taken as wisdom literature to be meditated on, he's probably frustrated in practice.